Welcome to an exploration of one of psychology's most fascinating phenomena, the therapeutic paradox. The therapeutic paradox states that change often occurs only when we stop trying to change. When we accept our current state, transformation becomes possible. Let's begin by understanding what this paradox actually means. The therapeutic paradox suggests that the harder you try to force change in yourself, the more stuck and resistant you become. Paradoxically, accepting where you are right now creates the psychological conditions necessary for natural transformation to occur. We can express this mathematically. Effort to change is inversely proportional to actual change achieved. This graph shows the paradox curve. As effort increases, actual change decreases. Maximum change happens with minimal forcing. But why does this counterintuitive phenomenon occur? Let's explore the underlying psychology. The therapeutic paradox is rooted in fundamental principles of human psychology. When we force change, we activate psychological resistance. Our psyche naturally defends against perceived threats, even self-imposed ones. Imagine pushing down on a spring. The harder you push, the more it pushes back. This is exactly how psychological resistance works. We can model this as R equals K times F, where R is resistance, F is force of change effort, and K is a resistance constant. Forcing change creates a split in consciousness. One part observing and judging, another part being observed and judged. This creates internal conflict. The judging self criticizes the judged self, consuming energy that could be used for actual growth. Psychologist Carl Rogers provided crucial insights into this paradox through his work on human potential. Rogers proposed that humans have an innate actualizing tendency, a natural drive toward growth and fulfillment. Growth equals actualizing tendency minus conditions of worth. Conditions of worth are the shoulds and musts we impose on ourselves. Like a plant growing toward sunlight, the actualizing tendency naturally moves us toward health when conditions allow. When we practice acceptance, we remove the psychological obstacles that block this natural growth process. We can actually model the acceptance process mathematically to understand its dynamics. Acceptance over time follows this equation. A of t equals A max times 1 minus e to the negative kt. This is similar to exponential growth. Here, A is the acceptance level, t is time, and k is the acceptance rate constant, which varies by individual and circumstance. This graph shows how acceptance builds gradually over time, approaching a maximum level asymptotically. The rate of change in our condition equals alpha times acceptance level. Change rate is directly proportional to acceptance. This mathematical model confirms that real change emerges as a natural consequence of acceptance, not force. Let's examine a concrete example, treating insomnia through this paradoxical approach. The traditional approach to insomnia is trying harder to fall asleep. People tell themselves they must sleep now. But this creates performance anxiety. The brain becomes hyper-alert, monitoring whether sleep is happening, which prevents sleep. The paradoxical approach is to accept being awake and give up trying to sleep. Probability of sleep given acceptance is greater than probability of sleep given effort. This has been validated in clinical studies. Clinical studies show approximately 70% improvement rates with acceptance-based insomnia therapy compared to 30% with effort-based approaches. Acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT, is a modern therapeutic approach built on this paradox. ACT focuses on developing psychological flexibility rather than directly reducing symptoms. ACT has 6 core processes: acceptance of internal experiences, cognitive diffusion, present moment awareness, self as context, values clarification, and committed action. Well-being is a function of psychological flexibility and alignment with values, not absence of distress. Meta-analyses show ACT produces effect sizes between 0.6 and 0.8, considered medium to large effects in psychology. Let's examine the energy dynamics of resistance versus acceptance. Fighting against yourself requires constant energy expenditure to maintain the internal conflict. Energy of resistance equals the integral from 0 to t of force over time. This is cumulative energy spent fighting yours. Compare the energy cost. Resistance requires massive ongoing energy, while acceptance requires minimal energy and frees resources for growth. When we stop fighting ourselves, that freed energy becomes available for genuine growth and positive change. Recent neuroscience research reveals the brain mechanisms underlying this paradox. The default mode network, or DMN, becomes hyperactive during self-judgment and rumination. When the DMN is overactive, we get stuck in self-referential loops of judgment and worry. Research shows acceptance-based practices reduce DMN activity by 30 to 40%, measured through fMRI studies. DMN activity is proportional to self-judgment intensity. Less judgment means quieter DMN and more mental freedom. Simultaneously, prefrontal cortex engagement increases with acceptance, enhancing executive function and emotional regulation. How can we apply the therapeutic paradox in everyday life? For anxiety, instead of fighting it, practice observing it with curiosity. What does anxiety feel like in your body? For depression, accept the low mood without adding the secondary suffering of self-criticism and should statements. This diagram shows the transformation. High levels of suffering decrease to baseline through the practice of acceptance. For anger, the practice is to feel it fully in your body without acting on it impulsively or suppressing it. The key principle is allowing experience without resistance or fusion, being with what is, without being consumed by it. Let's clarify common misunderstandings about the therapeutic paradox. First, acceptance does not mean resignation or passive giving up. It's an active process of engaging with reality. Resignation is passive defeat, while acceptance is active engagement with what is true right now. Acceptance does not mean you approve of harmful situations or should tolerate abuse. True acceptance means acknowledging what is true in this moment, then consciously choosing your response from that clarity. Let's synthesize this into a comprehensive change equation. Change equals acceptance times values times energy. This is the fundamental change equation, where C is change achieved, A is level of acceptance, V is clarity of values, and E is available energy. These three components multiply together. If any component is 0, no change occurs. All three are necessary. If acceptance is 0, then change is 0, regardless of other factors. Resistance blocks all transformation. Maximum sustainable change occurs when all three factors are optimized through therapeutic work. What does the actual timeline of change through acceptance look like? The timeline shows gradual growth over weeks, with potential breakthrough moments occurring around week 3 to 4 as acceptance deepens. The initial phase takes 2 to 4 weeks of consistent acceptance practice to establish the neural pathways. The middle phase from weeks 4 to 8 involves deepening acceptance and integrating it into daily life. The later phase is ongoing maintenance, where growth becomes more natural and self-sustaining. Let's address the deeper question. Why does this paradox exist in human psychology? Evolution designed our brains to detect and fix problems quickly for survival in dangerous environments. Our threat detection system constantly scans for problems, which was adaptive for physical survival, but creates issues with internal experiences. But internal experiences like emotions and thoughts are not external threats that need to be fixed or eliminated. External threat does not equal internal experience. Treating them the same creates the paradox. Acceptance aligns with the actual nature of internal experience, which is fluid, changing, and not inherently dangerous. How do we measure progress when we're not focused on eliminating symptoms? Instead of tracking symptom frequency, we track psychological flexibility, how quickly you recover from distress. Flexibility equals 1 over recovery time. Greater flexibility means faster recovery from emotional disturbance. Progress looks like dampening oscillations. Distress still occurs but returns to baseline faster and with less intensity over time. We also measure values-aligned behavior rather than feeling states. Are you doing what matters despite discomfort? The key is assessing your relationship with experience rather than the experience its. Can you hold it with more compassion? Let's discuss practical daily integration of acceptance principles. Morning practice. Set an intention for willingness to experience whatever arises, rather than trying to control your internal state. Throughout the day, notice when resistance arises and practice softening around it, creating space for experience. The 5-step process. Notice resistance, allow the experience, soften around it, choose your values, and act accordingly. Evening practice. Reflect on moments when you practiced acceptance versus resistance. What did you notice? Total practice equals the sum of micro moments throughout the day. Small moments accumulate into transformation. Let's resolve the apparent paradox and understand its deeper wisdom. The therapeutic paradox is not truly paradoxical once we understand the psychological mechanisms at play. What appears paradoxical from outside becomes clear from within. Resistance creates stuck energy. Acceptance allows flow and natural change. Acceptance creates the psychological and neurobiological conditions for organic change to emerge naturally. True wisdom equals knowing when to accept what cannot be changed, plus knowing when and how to change what can be changed. The therapeutic paradox teaches us to work with our nature rather than against it, aligning with deeper psychological truth. Change that emerges through acceptance is more sustainable and authentic than change forced through willpower alone. This represents the natural unfolding of human potential when we remove obstacles through acceptance rather than forcing growth through effort.